What's up, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the Occupy Fantasy Podcast. You know me, I'm Brian Jester, co founder and co host here at Occupy Fantasy. Normally, I'm joined by Chris on our podcast, our NFL writer, but we had to bring in a very special guest this time around. If you've been an Occupy Fantasy member, you've read our PGA stuff, you know Niromada. He's our PGA DFS writer. And this past week, Niromada in NBA DFS took home a $200,000 prize. It's incredible. So we wanted to bring him on here, get his story, talk about the sweat, talk about his DFS experience, all the lessons he's learned from playing years of DFS. So let's bring him in. Niromada, what's up, man? How you feeling?
Thanks, Brian. It's started to sink in a little bit that I did it that I took down that NBA GPP, ironically of all things. So I feel good. What else can I say about that?
That's true. Yeah, it's hard to feel anything other than good at this point. Timeout. You might be wondering why there's no video of Niromada. Well, he has a relatively high profile day job and he prefers to keep his identity private. It only adds to the legend that is Niromada. So let's talk about it a bit. You've been playing DFS for a while. Tell the people out there how long you've been playing, what your grind has been like.
It's definitely been a grind. It's been a long time. I was just, I was doing a lot. I think when you accomplish something that you've been trying to do for a while, it puts you in a bit of a reflective state of mind. And yesterday I was being quite reflective on my DFS journey, we'll say. And I was looking back through my roto tracker and my stats and old emails and everything. And I started playing in 2012 on Draft Street, I think in the spring or summer of 2012. And I was always mostly a golf specialist, even from the beginning. That was always my interest. I grew up around golf. I had jobs in golf. I understand the game and players. I play it. I understand high level golf. So that was always my thing, and that's how I started. My roto tracker goes back to 2014, but I know that I was playing on Draft Street before then, back in 2012. So that it's been almost 9 years. It's been crazy. I've learned a lot. We can talk about that stuff later, but that's that's my journey from the very beginning
Nine
until now.
9 years. And if anyone ever says they played Draft Street, you know that they're an OG in playing
Right.
DFS, right? Because that was before FanDuel DraftKings. That was the first major site, and you've been playing since then. So I mean, you've been playing all this time. What has been your biggest win up until this $200,000 victory?
Yeah, it is crazy when you say Draft Street. You're old school because most people don't even know what that is. In fact, I remember playing on Draft Street and hearing about DraftKings, and I looked at the format and everything, and I'm like, oh, this is terrible. It's not as good as Draft Street. Like Draft Street's the best. I'm never going to play on DraftKings. What is this thing? Um, but anyway, my biggest win prior to this week was I took down. Pull up my results real quick. It was a PGA contest on DraftKings in 2016 for almost 25K, and that was my biggest win up until this week.
So 25K in the sport you know and love, and then
Yep.
fast forward 4 years later, I guess almost 5 years later, and then you
Yep.
hit for 200K in what I would argue is much tougher DFS times compared to 2016, compared to 2012, and you hit for the biggest score of your life in a sport that I would imagine you don't play that much of. So, what's your experience with NBA DFS? Would you say you're good at NBA DFS?
Well, my roto tracker results would tell me I'm a net loser in NBA DFS until this week. But I did a little bit of calculating. So NBA had 10% of my cumulative entry fees over the last 9 years. I did have a big NBA win early on, and also in 2015 in one of the bigger $27 GPPs. I took home second, uh, but like that, yeah, I gave all that money back over the course of the next 4 years, and I never played a ton of it because for me, someone with a quote unquote real job, family, and a lot of other responsibilities, the grind of NBA is just really hard for me to justify because you can dabble in NBA and you can just play it just because you want some action or because you're a fan of NBA or whatever. Like those, that's all fine. But if you're going to play NBA for real, you have to stay on top of the news. And when the games tip off, like you're not done. You have to stick around for the possible lineup swaps, and you have to be thinking about that stuff beforehand. And you have to leave yourself some outs, if you're going to do it for real. If you're not going to do that for real, like you can't play NBA. You will get destroyed over the course of time because there are just too many other people that are willing to play NBA that way. And so, therefore for me, like it just was always tough. And I enjoy basketball. I enjoy watching basketball. I played basketball growing up, but it's just the time justification for me is very hard to make a case to do it.
Yeah, and you make a lot of good points, and you'll see, especially on Twitter, you'll see a lot of casual players wanting late swap on both sites, DraftKings and FanDuel for NBA. They think it's an advantage to them, when in reality, what you just outlined is it's a major disadvantage because the average player will use late swap if someone is ruled out, and then they'll be able to change their lineups to avoid a zero. Whereas the professionals and the people doing this every day and actually grinding from 5 p.m. Eastern till midnight, they're not only just making swaps to avoid zeros, they're actually making swaps to optimize lineups based on all the news we get after lock, which most people aren't doing. So it actually is a big disadvantage for most people to not late swap or to even have that as an option. So
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah,
the funny thing is that played into my process, which we'll talk about, I'm sure here shortly. But that played into how I thought about the slate on Wednesday, and you know, got into how I thought about my lineup and the construction and all those things. But overall, I agree with you. If you're a casual player, like the absolute worst thing you should want is late swap in NBA. You shouldn't want late swap in anything. You
truth.
should want everything to lock at lock and just let it go, because that anything else you are giving up an edge to professionals, like no question.
Exactly. I mean, we talked about it with Jack's big win on the what was it, the Christmas slate, I think, or a few weeks ago. And yeah, he was late swapping, and most people still aren't late swapping even on those all
Yep.
day 3 game slates. So similar idea there. And I do want to get your strategy for this particular slate, but first I want to ask why this contest. It was the 444 $444 entry fee, Epic Monster on FanDuel. You had one entry. Why did you play this contest?
Yeah, so I would normally never play this contest, and I would only play at the 444 level in PGA. I have a pretty good track record at that level. I don't even know if you would call that high stakes. Do you call that mid stakes? Somewhere in there. But I'm comfortable playing at that level for PGA. I'm much less comfortable playing at that level for NBA. But in for most of 2020, I've been following the Occupy satellite strategy. So I had never played a ton of satellites, throughout my time in DFS. I'd played some qualifiers, but I'd never, really got into it. I think the accepted wisdom that I had read or I had heard was, don't play the satellites. Why would you play and get raked twice? You're going to pay the rake in the satellite, you win the ticket, you play into the next tournament, you're going to get raked again. So don't do that. There's no need to do it. But I think the thing that I missed and I didn't understand until I read the guide that Occupy produces on how to be a winning DFS player is that the satellite strategy is probably the single best way to up your level in DFS and build and build your bankroll in a responsible way. It's a gateway that allows you to play at tournaments where you can't normally afford the buy-in, or it's outside the parameters of your bankroll to buy in at that level. And then you hope that, what happens to me is what happens to you. You bank one of those big ones, and now all of a sudden you have a bankroll with which to, you know bankroll your DFS adventures.
Yeah, and a lot what goes overlooked with our satellite strategy with satellites is in DFS, most of the payouts are either extremely top heavy, like you see in most GPPs, or they're just a low risk variety, 50-50s, head to heads, double ups, half the field doubles their money. Very rarely do you see contests like satellites where the top X percent all get the same amount and it's a high risk. So, like, the satellite you played to get in here, it was, I think, the top 50 out of so many won the same amount of money, $444. So not only do you use that 444 for a future event, but it's also uh, a less risky, high risk approach by playing something where not all the money's in first place, but it's also a little bit higher than your average 50-50. So what was this satellite that you played to get this ticket?
Yeah, it's like a quintuple up on steroids, or
Yeah.
something like that. I looked back, and it was a $12 satellite on FanDuel. It was during the Bills and Patriots Monday night game where Diggs and Josh Allen went crazy. I made, I think, 10 lineups that night on FanDuel. Actually, one of them finished in, air quotes, second in the GP, in the big GPP. I think I was point 0.2 points out of first, but I was also tied with like 22 other people, so it would have been a pretty big chop to get to first. But I put three lineups into that satellite. There was a massive amount of overlay, so there should have been 5,000 entries into it. There was barely 500. I don't even think there were 500
Wow.
entries total, but I put three in, and one of them got into the top 50. It finished in 26th place. So to your point, in a bigger GPP, finishing in 26th, kind of like a ho hum, like, oh, that was a great lineup, but I missed it again. Like, I didn't get, really up close to the top. So now I get this really low payout when you think of it, considering how many people I beat. But in this case, I got the $444 ticket, and I, just kind of tucked it away, and I made the mental note and put a reminder on my calendar that I was going to have a bigger entry into a FanDuel contest, later in early January. I didn't know at the time what the contest would be, because you don't really know that you don't always know that, I'll say,
Right.
on those satellites. But that was it. That was the reason why I played, and that's why I only played one entry. If it was PGA, I might have played more than one entry, but in a sport where I'm not historically profitable and I don't have the precedent, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean that's solid, and that's not overextending your bankroll or even being overconfident in your abilities just because you won one ticket. And to the point, you won $444 off of $12. That's 37 times your entry fee. You would have to finish extremely high in a GPP to win that amount. You wouldn't even win that amount if you won first in a 100 player league. So again, just speaks to the point about the potential payouts of a satellite that most people overlook. So, all right, you get the one ticket, you mark your calendar. Satellite ticket days are always one of the most fun days of the year if you're following the satellite strategy. So, Wednesday comes around, you have your one ticket. So what's your strategy here for this single bullet, especially on a slate where uh, your typical NBA slate, we had no idea if Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were playing by the time the game locked at 7 p.m.
Yeah, and that was a big part of it. So in the days leading up to it, I started to pay a little more attention to NBA, and I forced myself to play NBA DFS, both on DK and FanDuel. Now I wasn't playing for big dollars, but the best way to make yourself interested in what's going on is to play some contests. So in the days leading up to it, I was playing some contests. I was paying more attention to teams, rotations, players, who was playing well, who wasn't. I will watch NBA games. I'm a Lakers fan. I'll watch the NBA playoffs. I'll do that stuff, but I don't follow it at a DFS type of level that you need to follow it in order to be somewhat successful. So I started paying more attention. The first thing I did was I read the plug, and I it really I think reading the plug it did get me onto Ben Simmons, which was great. But it really helped me organize my thoughts on the slate, and they do such a good job of doing that in the NBA plug, and really in all the plugs in Occupy. It just you can just take them for what they are, and you can grab plays out of there and stuff them into your lineups, and get some other things out of the NBA model and do things that way. But I think the plugs are great because they really help you look at the entirety of the slate. And when I did that, to me, then a key decision point was, what are you going to do about the Clipper game? So Clippers, Warriors playing late, Paul George questionable, Kawhi on a back-to-back, but not on the injury report, hadn't played in a back-to-back since 2017. But you've got this thing where the NBA put the new rule in that if you're resting somebody for a game that's on national TV, which the Clippers and Warriors was on national TV, you have to pay a fine. So there was a bunch of unknowns there, and my general thought was, I think this is a situation that I want to fade. I had read some other content throughout the day. It sounded like some of the sharper players were going to leave openings on their lineups because there was also the Bulls and Sacramento game late. Both of those had high totals. They should have been fast games with lots of fantasy points. So I think the sharper thinking was leave space open for that. Let's see what happens. Does Kawhi get declared inactive? And at the 444 level, I figured that this GPP would be full of sharper players. And if you look at the top 20 list, you'll see plenty of those folks in there. But I thought then, so for me, for a single bullet, the best leverage I could have would be to fade that situation, cross my fingers, and hope that Paul George and Kawhi would both play, therefore ruining everybody who saves spots for there, just because it ruins the value then of all the other players in that game. Now they're essentially overpriced, again, in theory, for what their most likely outcomes are. And then, I had first started to say, okay, I really wanted Gobert and Simmons from reading the plug. So I had that, and then I wanted to put Elf Payton kind of tied in with Gobert because the Knicks were playing the Jazz. And then there was the news that Christian Wood wasn't going to play for the Rockets, and DeMarcus Cousins was going to start for the Rockets, and that really changed everything that I did, changed everything that I was thinking. So I had to throw Gobert out, stick Cousins in, because now I felt like Cousins was unfadable at 4K, whatever he was. Let me look. He was 4,100 at the center position, which then made me decide, okay, my second point of leverage is going to be everyone's going to have Cousins, which then I assume means they're going to grab some guys at the top of the salary ranges.
Yep.
So what if I have Cousins, but I don't really take anybody at the top of the salary ranges? And what if I try to build just a hyper balanced lineup? I felt that like that would be unique, and I felt like that would give me, the most leverage. So now I'm using the OF model, using DFS Magic. I'm going through different scenarios of lineups. By the way, like I'm doing this a half hour before lock on a Wednesday night when I've got golf lineups that, Wednesday nights are usually my nights where it's 100% golf. Like I'm making golf lineups,
Right.
all night after I'm done with work, and my kids have gone to sleep, and often my wife has gone to sleep as well. And that's what I'm doing. But I'm trying to do this all leading up to lock, which is reminding me why I don't play NBA, as I'm trying to help my son with dinner and those kind of things. Like that's real life when you're not a
Mm-hmm.
professional or you're a pseudo professional like I am. It you just all those things matter. and they're real, but that's what I was trying to do. And I got to I got to a construction that I liked with all mid level players. So on FanDuel, it depends. I don't know for various people listening how much you play on FanDuel, but most of my players were in like that $7,000 range. So real quick, I'll actually give the lineup. So it was Elf Payton and Ben Simmons at point guard, Colin Sexton and SGA at shooting guard, and then I had my small forward position, and this is where I wasn't really sure what I want to do because I couldn't find some good combos there. But I love the fact that the Hornets were playing the Hawks, even though it actually ended up being a low scoring game. Uh, but Atlanta's terrible on defense. The model liked a lot of the Charlotte players. I noticed that Hayward wasn't slated for a lot of ownership. And so Hayward made sense there. And then the perfect fit off of that was DeAndre Hunter for the Hawks. So I liked having the idea of having players who I would consider almost like fringe players. So Hayward was 7,700, DeAndre Hunter was 6K. But to have those players in a pace up game in a good scenario. So, you can play James Harden any night that you want because he can always go for 70 fantasy points or
Sure.
80 fantasy points. Same with LeBron or AD or, name your elite NBA star, and they can do that any night in any matchup. But for someone like a Hayward or DeAndre Hunter, in my mind, the most likely path to them going crazy is to be playing in an up tempo game against each other, where I'm trying to always, in all my DFS lineups, I'm trying to minimize the number of things that I have to get right to win. So if I'm just right that the Hornets and the Hawks, and more so, is the model right? Is the betting market right? If those things are right, then I get those two players, lower ownership, and I knew Hunter would be really low owned because his price had been increasing a ton on FanDuel, but not so much on DraftKings. So I assumed all the professionals would get all their DeAndre Hunter exposure on
Yep.
DraftKings, not on FanDuel. And like the thing is, I was wrong. The total of the game, it was 102 to 94. They scored 196 points. I
Right.
don't know what the total was, but I'm guessing they went under by like 25 or 30.
Hmm.
But Hayward went crazy, and DeAndre Hunter had a good enough game, and so I got my leverage, and I got my good results. And then just to finish the rest of the lineup, it was Marvin Bagley, Sabonis at the power forward positions, and then Boogie at center, as I already talked about.
Yeah, man. All that is so sharp. Like just really sharp thinking about everything from a high level, and not necessarily the individual players. Digging into player matchups and whatnot. But for you, someone who doesn't play a ton of NBA, one, just get your feet wet the days before, get some skin in the game, so you have a reason to actually try and figure it out before your big ticket. And then when the day comes, figure out what the field's going to do, figure out what the sharp players are going to do specifically in this contest, and then again, not necessarily try to score the most points, but try to do the least amount possible to win the tournament, which are two separate ideas. And playing two guys in the same game, we talk about NBA correlation, not there's not a ton there. But if you're right, again, there's less things you have to get right. If you're right that that game scores more points and the game stays close, then both Hayward and Hunter would benefit from that situation. Same thing with Alfred Payton. So, I mean, really sharp from you, just an incredible lineup, and just it goes to show that even though you don't play NBA DFS a ton, the skills you learn from your other DFS play, especially PGA, NFL, and whatever else you play, can translate to other sports. And it's so important. A lot of it is really high level strategy. And then it's just the players and names that change each day. So, I mean, I commend you for that. Just an incredible way to think about that. But, Niromada, let's get into the fun part, the sweat, right? You said Wednesdays are normally your nights for making PGA lineups, and I myself had 3 entries into this contest, so I was actually following it. Didn't nearly have any luck with the injuries I sustained in my lineups, so I was just looking, and then around 10 o'clock Eastern, a couple people text me and say, holy shit, look at Niromada. And I was like, what did Niromada do? I didn't even think about like what was
Right.
going
Yeah.
on. And so I said, let me go to the contest, and I see you're in first place, 200K. And it's funny because at what 6 p.m. Eastern, you messaged me. It's like, what's up, man? You got any tips for this NBA contest? And I was like, I'm just mashing buttons. I was kind of hoping you had some insight to this. So I checked. I see you're up 200K. When did you notice that you were at the top and that maybe you had a shot at this?
Yeah, well, I so the only thing that I did, so I got the lineup in. By the way, I barely got it in. I had my dummy lineup in, and then I had my what I thought at the time was going to be my real lineup, and then when the Cousins news broke out, I had to change everything. But it took me 20, 30 minutes of thinking and mixing and matching to get to that place. And so the clock was counting down. I think I got it submitted with like 25 seconds left. In
Wow.
fact, it was so close that that screen pops up on FanDuel to enter it into other contests after you finish it
Hmm.
into the the big GPP, and then one other like a smaller single entry one. But those two had my secondary lineup because it hadn't the system hadn't caught up enough in
Wow.
FanDuel. Like my main got into the 444, even though I had changed it, but it still entered my other lineup into those other two even afterwards because that's how tight I was to the finish.
That was
So
close.
I yeah, right. So I really just I wanted to make sure that players I had playing in the other games were playing, and that was really all I cared about. So I checked before each of the next set of games would start, like 15 minutes prior, looked at the lineups to make sure that my players were in the starting lineup like they were like they were supposed to be.
Right.
And then that was it. Like after that, like I can't control anything after that. And my kids are eating, they need baths, like all that stuff has to happen. And so I'm just doing that normal stuff. And then I saw that Begley was in the lineup for Sacramento, and I was like, cool. By the way, I have not looked at any results yet,
Right.
and so I get ready to start doing my PGA stuff. I looked once, I saw that I was winning like 2K, like 2,000 something. And I was like, cool, okay, fine. I must have got off to an okay start, great. And then I didn't look again until 9:30, and that's when I looked and I saw that I was in first place. And I saw I had 370 points. I knew on FanDuel you often have to get close to 400 or exceed 400 in NBA to win a really big GPP. So I thought I might have a chance, but I mean, like, let's be real. Like, I've done this for 9 years almost. And I've been in that position 8,000 other times, and all 8,000 of those other times. Well, again, not all of them, right? I've clearly had a nice share of cashes, but just nothing that big. Like
Right.
all the times that I've been in a situation where it's that big, every single time someone's caught me at the end, or I've fallen off, or whatever. Like it just never, you never end up being at first. So I was a little charged up, but I didn't honestly think that much of it. I was mostly happy that I felt like I was going to get a pretty nice cash out of it, and that would, bolster my bankroll for PGA, and PGA was starting the next day. It was also a weird day in the country with all the stuff that was going on at the Capitol, and no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, I'm sure you had strong feelings. So it was just weird. Like it was just a lot of stuff going on, and so I was not, I wasn't paying, I mean, I'm laughing because I just wasn't paying that close of attention
Right.
to it. And I kept building. I didn't go on to Discord. I didn't do anything. I just kept building my PGA lineups. And when I looked, so then I started getting superstitious because I was like, okay, I haven't looked. I wasn't even looking into the contest. I was just looking at the front screen on my phone,
Right.
seeing that I was in first place. I didn't know how many people were close to me. I didn't do any of it, but because I hadn't done it yet, I was like, okay, I can't do it. Like I can't, I don't want to mess with it. Like I just can't do it. How stupid is that, right?
That's the
When you
golfer.
when you
That's
think about it.
that's the golfer in you. You can't you
Yeah,
can't
right.
change things
That's
up.
absolutely 100%. That's the golfer in me. Don't jinx it. Don't mess with the juju. Don't do any of that. So So I said, all right, I'm not looking. So I looked again at 10:30, and when I pulled it up at 10:30, I fully expected to be out of first place.
Sure.
And when I saw that I was still in first place, I started to get, a little bit nervous because I knew. Then I looked to see where the games were, and I saw that the Warriors and Clippers were in the middle of the third quarter. Towards the end of the third quarter, I saw that the Bulls and the Kings were starting the fourth quarter. And by the way, the one thing that had happened previously, 2 hours before, was Paul George and Kawhi had been announced as both playing and starting. So, now I
Perfect.
knew I that happened, right? So I knew that I got my leverage out of that. It looks like I put together an amazing lineup. So now I start getting nervous because I'm thinking like, okay, maybe I actually have a shot to win this thing. But again, superstition in me. I looked at 9:30, then I looked at 10:30. I'm not looking again until 11:30. It'll be over by then.
Right.
And so I looked again at 11:30, and sure enough, I'm sitting there in first. And then that point, as funny as this is to say, like that was the first time that I looked into the contest and I saw that I won by like 18 points or something. So that, it wasn't really that close. But the reason why it wasn't that close was because Marvin Bagley finally played up to his potential, or the way he had been playing last year for like the first time all year. And he went for 21-12 and had 2 steals and 2 blocks. He had 45 fantasy points. And that really, pushed me over the edge for the win. And then I checked into the Occupy Discord server, and I had a bunch of messages, and I ran back up through the NBA chat, and it was great because people were like sweating it for me. I wasn't, really sweating it like that, but they were actually sweating it for me. So it was really cool to see the community, kind of come together, and they were all cheering me on, and that was great, and
That's
I
awesome.
appreciated that. And then after that, it was just like, wow, this really happened. Like I kind of can't believe it.
Oh, man, it's so amazing. Yeah, the community aspect definitely is cool, especially when you look back after the fact and you're not even sweating it yourself. But
Yes.
I mean, just pure domination. You win a GPP with all the sharp players in it by 20 points, no matter what the sport is. That's incredible. That's crazy. And yeah, you needed a lot of things to fall into place, but guess what? You need a lot of things to fall into place to win a GPP. And over the course of 9 years, you keep having sharp thoughts and sharp processes. Eventually those things are going to fall into place and you're going to win a pretty big prize, and you won it with 200K. I mean, just personally, congrats to you, because that's an incredible achievement and just perseverance to stick with it through all these years and finally get that big payday.
Yeah, it's first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. You, when I look through the top 10 of this GPP, like Chet Abyss, Squirrel Patrol, Chipotle, like all the people are in that top 10, and there I am sitting, sitting at the top of that, and it was just one of those things where I finally, timed the luck up with some sharp thinking. I've had some other good runs. I've run really hot at the end of things, and I've won those GPPs, but they're for 10K or for 15K or whatever. And that might sound great, but let me tell you, lose for 3 months in a row, playing PGA or playing other sports, and those 33s and 27s and 10s and 5s and 3s and all those things add up real quick, and they disintegrate those types of wins, relatively quickly. That's why all of that EV is buried up in those really big top prizes. And I finally, just timed it up. I ran real hot, got lucky in a contest where the first prize was really big.
Yeah, man, you
Uh,
can't you can't waste your run hot on a 10K to first when you're playing this all the
and
time.
100%. And that's what, in my previous times, that's what I had done. Like you never think of it at the time, right? You're always happy to win the
Yeah.
10K or the 15K or the 20, whatever. But as you know very well, with your Millie win in the Super Bowl, like the best time to use your run hot is when the first prize is ginormous. And
Yes,
so, I finally was able to match those two things up.
dude,
And so that,
incredible.
that's great.
Oh, yeah, just so amazing. So, all right, 200K richer. Any,
Yeah.
if you want to divulge it, or if you even know yet, do you have any plans for that money yet?
Yeah, I don't certainly I will, add some of it to my bankroll. I will play slightly more for my PGA DFS. I will play play at slightly higher levels, but all within responsible means. And I was never that great at bankroll management. That was always one of the holes in my game for sure. Uh, but coming on board to occupy and getting to know you better and reading the ultimate guide and all that really helped me with my bankroll stuff. So I feel really good about it now because I can tell you the 2015 version of me. If he had won this 200K, it
Oh
would have
man.
not lasted that long, or I certainly would have been um, much more irresponsible with the math behind my decisions after that.
The top pros would have been
But
licking their chops knowing that
yeah,
you
for
had
sure, because
200K in your
they
pocket.
would have been like that money's coming right back into the ecosystem. I love
Yeah.
it. Love to see someone like him in first place. Love it.
Yes.
Uh, so most of it will be saved and added to the bankroll. Certainly, my wife and I will take a nice trip somewhere. I'll get myself a new set of golf clubs. So some little things like that. But more than anything, for me, I just was I was just satisfied that I was able to pay off the effort.
Yes.
Yeah, the money was great, but just like paying off all the years of that effort, which again I enjoyed most of the time. To time up the run hot with a tournament that had a huge first prize, just like that. That's the main thing for me. Like that's the biggest satisfaction I get from it. Rather than thinking like, ooh, what are the all the crazy things I'm going to do with the money? Definitely want to do some fun things. There needs to be some reward for that. So trip, golf clubs, maybe a few other little things. But other than that, like the rest of that just goes into the other piles of money, and you just keep going.
Yeah, man. You said it perfectly, and it doesn't have to be DFS. Like it could be anything you're passionate about, anything you work hard for, and the money is nice. And I think a lot of people, especially people who start businesses, people and those businesses get bought out, people who are trying to start a career in entertainment or social media, and they get that first big break. And yeah, the check comes with it, and the check is nice, and that makes things a lot easier. But it really is that satisfaction of knowing that over these past X number of years, I've been making these sacrifices. I've been working really hard. Some people have looked at me crazy for working this hard on something with no results so far or little results so far. And then to actually get that and prove that what all you were doing was worth it really is worth so much more than the actual money you get from it.
Yeah, it's and you know it, and that's why you're able to say it so well.
Yeah.
But it really it really is true, and that's the thing about DFS is it's just so crazy in terms of the variance and the time horizons, and especially when you're not MMEing. Like that's the hidden benefit to MMEing when you're good at something, right? When you're bad, the hidden benefit to MMEing is you lose your money a whole lot faster. But when you're good, is you just accelerate all those timelines because you're putting in so many more entries every day,
Right.
and you're just shortening the time until the next big hit comes. And so for me, because I'm not an MME person, I've expanded that part of my game, and I've gotten better at it this past year or 2 years. But like so you're then looking at 9 years for me, right? As opposed to maybe it's 9 months or 2 years for someone who's playing a lot more volume or playing more professionally. But yeah, you have all the people helped you along the way, people that have supported you, the people that have looked at you like you're crazy. It's nice to pay that off in achieving what you set out to achieve. There's just a deep satisfaction that comes with that. That's nice.
It really is. It truly is, and a great way to put that. So, I know you're busy. I'll let you get out of here shortly, but I know a lot of people look to you, not just in our Discord channel, but reading the PGA plug. You're wise. You have years of experience. I've leaned on you. I've learned a lot from you since getting to know you over the last year or so. Our relationship has been great, and again, I've learned a ton from you. Just not just in DFS, the mental aspect of it, life as well. So I feel like you have a lot of knowledge that people can learn from. So, not to put yourself on the pedestal, but any final, takeaways, thoughts, lessons you've learned over these last 9 years that you think people could benefit from, whether they're playing DFS or not?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, and let's be real, like there is no pedestal. I'm still the same person and the same DFS player that I was on Tuesday before this happened. I just have finally, realized the EV. Like, and that's it. So, I certainly don't consider myself any different. I'm not any better at NBA than I was before. I'm not going to start playing NBA at high volume. Like that's not my thing. But to your point, I've absolutely learned a ton during this journey. I was when I was being reflective yesterday, I was certainly thinking about all those things that I learned, and I think one of the first things I was thinking was like when you're doing something like DFS or you're doing any type of endeavor where you're setting out to achieve a, a goal of some sort and it's not going to be easy to achieve, you always have to be looking and evaluating the opportunity. What's the edge? Do you have one? What's the macro environment that you're playing in? Like I look back to 2012 and I still have some of the emails that have the draft street, because draft street used to email you like the literal results from the GPP like that you entered like every time. And I look through the player list in there and it's Kandia and every like OG DFS professional is in all these contests back in draft street in 2012, and I'm thinking like, what's the difference between those players? Well, because I didn't have any background in poker, like I had no idea that like 2012 through 2015 or 16 was going to be the years where you could really dominate and you could really take advantage of a immature market where there wasn't a lot of info out there on how to beat the game that you were playing. I had no background in poker. Like I said, like I just didn't, I didn't know. I was playing for action and playing because I love golf and playing to try to make a big score. And you contrast to what those those players did. Like they made a ton of money,
A
but
lot.
they made it right. Like a lot. Like how much would you like to be back in
Oh my God.
2012? Let me
Yeah.
tell you, like but like they made it not because they're smarter than me. Well, actually, plenty of them might be smarter than me. But my point is just that like they understood the environment they were in way better than I did, and that is a big key to any endeavor, anything that you're doing. You have to understand the environment and the world that you're living in. And I was terrible at that at the beginning. And it's not like I don't hate myself for it. It's not the big thing. Like I just that's not who I was back then. Like I didn't think about things in that way. But those players did background. They had come through a similar type of game scenario. They knew what was going on and they leveraged themselves and they took advantage. And that's something that I didn't do. It took me a number of years to get to that point where I finally understood what the environment was all about. But at that point, I'd missed the easy days. Like I had
Yeah.
missed. I was profitable during those years, but I clearly could have been way more profitable. And so that was a big one for me that I was thinking about yesterday. Another one of them was like, I always hear people talking about grind and saying they love to grind and the grind of DFS and all that kind of stuff. And I think, for me, it's like, that's fine. And you certainly are going to have to grind if you want to get really good at DFS or if you want to beat it or if you wanted to, get a meaningful portion of your income for it. But, you have to ask yourself the question, like, am I willing to eat it for years? Possibly. I think, you've seen my PGA stats. I feel like my results in PGA, while good, have still massively underperformed my stats of where I've finished in GPPs and how I do that consistently. And but that's math. That's the nature of DFS. It might also be partially the nature of PGA and why I think it's harder than the other sports, because you can't build the correlation and the leverage is so much harder to determine and all of that stuff. But still, the point is that you have to be willing to do that. And if you come in and you're coming in to play DFS just for the money, or coming in just for the money, like you might as well just get out now, because you're never going to survive. And it's because you lose way too much and way too often. Like for me, and I know you and I have talked about this specific point before, like money exists in DFS to keep the score. And that's it. Like you lose sight of that and you're toast because it's just so hard to be focused on the money because you are going to lose for days, weeks, sometimes months, maybe even a year. And so, will you still be willing to keep at it with that? If you're only focused on the money, you will not. But if you're focused on the puzzle solving and that piece of DFS, then you will do that. And I think the most important thing, like the sub point to that, is you have to build a process to handle failure, especially if you're not wired to deal with it well.
Yeah.
Uh, wide range of personalities in DFS, but I would say the average personality in DFS, that independent thinker and doer who is used to doing things for themselves and not having others provide jobs and that kind of stuff for them. Yeah, they're not wired to handle failure well, because that's part of what makes them good at what they do. And that's fine. Like you have to be able to leverage that strength, but you have to work on that. You have to be able to work on that weakness, because to me, if you don't, then you really start to make poor decisions from the mental and emotional side of losing. And for me, that hurts you way more than any knowledge of how to beat DFS will help you. And I know like people don't talk about that kind of stuff on podcasts, but for me, like that's real life. And it's so easy if you don't build a process to handle the failure and to learn from your results. By the way, in DFS, the easiest way to learn from your failures and your results, check out all the contest results the next day. Study the lineups of the sharper players. And not really even study the lineups, study their allocations. Why did they decide to allocate so much more than the field to a particular player on a given night, whether they won or lost? And to me, like that, you can focus on that more than you focus on the money and the profitability. Um,
And that can be
then you'll
painful
be
too,
much
by the way.
better
Like
off.
that can be painful, especially when you're in a losing streak or you've just
Yeah.
lost and you have to go back and look at all your losing lineups and the people that won instead of you and try to figure out what they did. And that's not easy on the mind either.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like DFS is a mirror. It's just a mirror that you have to hold up in front of your face like every single day, and you have to be honest with yourself. And if you're not, yeah, no shot. You really don't. And like you said, it all sounds good in theory, but how are you going to react when you lose for months in a row, or maybe for a year or more? Like, are you still going to be willing to do that work, to go through those lineups and those constructions and the slate the next day and see where you were wrong on the ownership projections, or why your way of thinking was possibly flawed? Or did you do, no, I did pretty good. Last night was variance. Like, and can you get to the point where you can decide what's the variance and what's things in my process I need to change? Those are all hard things to do no matter what. When you're in a losing streak or a downswing, they become extra hard. And that, becomes super challenging. But for me, like, it's almost like that's the good part of DFS. And I think this is like the last thing I was thinking of yesterday was you have to recognize what DFS is and what it's not, because it's a peer-to-peer game where you have to essentially outthink. That would be like ownership projections and game theory, and somewhat, or at least in golf anyway, like outpredict. And for predictions, you've got the OF model, DFS magic, projection systems, and optimizers in general. But you have to kind of sort of outpredict individual performance in a sport, and you might not have to do it. The optimizer and the projection system might do it for you, but you have to understand how to combine those two things together in order to win the game. It's not a game about having your favorite player do crazy things on a Sunday. It's not a game about just trying to out predict the future of a sporting event better than somebody else. To me, you also have to understand, like, there's a danger inherent in DFS. If you've seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, like the apps are there to capture your attention. They're there to make you pseudo addicted to what's going on. The game itself is like a dopamine roller coaster around these results that are buried in months or days and weeks, possibly, of losing. Again, depends on your stakes, to be clear. The higher level stakes you play, the more volume you play, the more this is prevalent. The lower that you play, the lower stakes and all that you play, the less prevalent that this becomes. But again, these are the questions you're asking yourself on: do I want to make this journey, into DFS? But you have to understand that. Like, you have to then say, how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to deal with the getting in that downswing, and then maybe I want to chase some of my losses and that kind of thing. How do I treat this as a business? How do I treat it as a profit loss generating system for myself? And I think the thing is, though, like, even with all of those downsides, uh, for me, is I've never found anything that allows you to consistently build resiliency in yourself and change your entire way of thinking related to investing and risk management than DFS. Like, nothing I've come across is even close to the power that DFS has to change those two things for you. And to me, those positives outweigh the negatives. And that's why I do it. That's why I play it. That opportunity is there available, to people that are listening to this. But you got to want to go through it, and you have to want to do it, and you have to trust you get to the other side. Like, I feel like you and I could have done this podcast on Tuesday before I won this,
Yeah.
and I'd be saying the exact same things, because that's really the key. Would I have been able to say the exact same things on Tuesday before I won this that I'm able to say today? If the answer is yes, then then hopefully I did a good job learning my lessons along the way and changing my process and changing the way I was thinking about things. The answer is no, then I didn't. Then I didn't do a good job.
Yeah.
But I feel like you and I could have had very similar podcasts here before I won this.
Yeah, man. All salient points, all just incredible ways to think about things. And I'll leave this podcast with two final thoughts. Everyone sees the screenshots. They see the top pros winning contests, and they think that's most of DFS, or playing it professionally, or playing it at a high level. Everything you just talked about is the other side, the unseen, the minus 300K swings, the
Mm-hmm.
mental aspect of dealing with it, working 18 hours a day in some days, sometimes more. And that's what you don't see. And can you handle that? That's a big part of it if you want to take that next step in DFS, or you aspire to be that. It's a big thinking. And then my second point is, you win the 200K, and someone made a point in Discord. It's like, this is a great, point of reference to my significant other. It's like, look, Niromada won 200K. I can do it too. But then that conversation quickly becomes, okay, then why haven't you done it? And the
Yeah.
answer of, I just haven't realized my expectations yet, doesn't quite cut it.
Nope. Let me tell you, man, regular people don't, again, regular people in air quotes, but they don't understand that answer. They don't get that. And they just don't. It's very hard to fathom unless you're in the middle of the game, or unless you understand, large numbers and variance and math really well. And I think I'd finish by saying thank you to you, Brian. Like, you've helped me a ton. I've become such a better DFS player in the last 18 months, through coming on to Occupy, reading the Ultimate Guide, a lot of which I knew clearly, but a lot of things I didn't know, and, change my approach on that. I certainly have a lot of people that I can thank. I can go way back to the early days when Jonathan Bales would answer my emails, or the coaching that I did with Dave Potts with Cheese is Good. And they were both helpful. Dave was extremely helpful to me in developing a process and figuring out the ways to think about DFS and contest selection and how to focus on a single sport and all those things. Cheese is a great guy, and he was great for me with that. But for you, I think of you as like an elite puzzle solver. You're just great in how you think about the game and how you approach it in a way to solve the game. and that's helped me a ton. It's made me so much better, as a player. So thank you, and thank you to the Occupy community for helping me get to that point.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Niromada, and I can't think of a better way to end the show than a giant compliment to me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, right. No better way to do that.
So congrats again, Niromada, on your 200K. Just a massive victory. Super happy for you. For those of you out there listening, if you enjoyed what Niromada just had to say and some of that resonated with you, or you want to learn more from him, you'll want to read his PGA DFS daily plug at occupyfantasy.com. Each week, he gives not only his top plays, but his thoughts on the course, the event itself, and then specific lineup strategies for how to help you win those PGA DFS events. So for Niromada, I'm Brian. Appreciate everyone listening. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon.